Hi, it's Dan Beck. I've been doing a wrap up on the parables and want to try to bring home some points about how the parables are really two stories in one. And so we already touched on the very the very first parable, which was what, Mary? What was the first parable we did? Uh, the well, right now we're on the unjust steward parable. And the workers in the vineyard parable was the first one we looked at. And in the workers of the vineyard parable, we had to use the centurion servant miracle to help us understand that God or Jesus in the parable of the vineyard is a person of authority, and he tells and designates and delegates things to be done. So that in the parable where it says he went out on the ninth hour and the noontime and the third hour, the 3 o'clock, every short few hours when he went out. Aside from the first time and the last time, he could have been sending other people out or taking other people along with him to assist him in doing the very task of hiring more workers for the vineyard. And at the very end of the day, he sees still these people they've been wanting to get hired to work in the vineyard, and they're still out there. And he personally walks up to them and asks them, why are you here all day idle? And they say, because no man hired them. That's when he realizes that, hey, these guys that I hired in the morning and told that I wanted to get anybody and everybody to work in the vineyard, these guys didn't do their job. Now, they were overly selective on who they had helping them to get more workers for the vineyard. Now, this is the equivalent of getting workers to work in the vineyard. It's sort of the equivalent of the high priest and the people in charge of the church at Jesus' time being selective and not letting Jesus in their group and not letting Jesus help them in that effort. At 12 years old, Jesus was associating with them, and he was already so knowledgeable that he was impressing, the scribes and the Pharisees. So Jesus himself is actually taking a case against these fellows who were the ones hired to work to get workers for the vineyard. There's not enough workers. God wanted all who were willing to work to work. So it's a very selective group, a cliquey group, and they don't want other people dabbling in their business. And so when you have that going on in that parable of the workers of the vineyard, then for them to turn around and cry and say, "Well, you made those equal with us." Equality is a big issue. Equality gets modern day heroes killed. Martin Luther King and various others. Equality is something that goes against the competitive nature of man, rubs him the wrong way. At least this is what Jesus was up against. And but God is not a respecter of persons, and He doesn't want us to be either. And He wants us to let our rain and our sunshine on both good and bad, and just and unjust. And He calls them doing that, being treating everybody equally in that regard. He calls that perfection. And so it's not hard to be perfect in front of God. Treat everybody the same. That's what Jesus points out. Okay, so in the parable then of the unjust steward, we again have a possibility of a rich man in charge of who has a steward in charge of all of his finances, and the steward may be overcharging everybody and not concerned about relationships, and that's exactly what he learns over time. Is as the steward learns, hey, if I get to lose my job, I want to have friends. Now I don't have that many friends because you've been overcharging everybody. And it was exactly what the rich man was concerned about, was that whether or not he was overcharging, because he was a rich man, but he was generous, and he cared about the relationships. So if you want good business partners and good people to do business with, you treat them like they're they need to get treated fairly, that their business is important to them. You have respect for what's theirs, even when they're buying from you. You have respect that they get something of value from you that they can use. So, in a sense, my concern for my customer is a good way for me to take care of myself. I take care of my customer. My customer takes care of me later or now, and through loyalty and continued business arrangements. So it has a lot to do with having faith in other people then too. And if you're faithful in something that belongs to your customer, you're respecting him getting value from you, then that's exactly what he's talking about as far as what he's talking to the steward about. The rich man's instructing the steward, saying, if you're faithful in what is another person's, then maybe somebody will give you something that you can call your own. But nobody's going to give you anything to turn it over to you to call your own if you can't handle something that is rightfully belongs to somebody else. And that is really the lesson in that parable. But when he says that the children of this generation are wiser than the children of light, he is referring to the children of light as being the lead into our next parable, which is the bridesmaids who had their lamps and their oil in their lamps. And he's talking about that they're wiser than the children of light, because the children of light that he was referring to were not forgiving enough. They did not care about as much about making the debt lighter on the people that owed it. They didn't want to reduce. They didn't want to reduce the debt that the sinners owed, if you will, or what have you. They want to make sure that they paid a full price for what they've done wrong. And that is what it seems to imply when he says that the children of this generation are wiser than the children of light. So when we get to this parable of the 10 bridesmaids, we'll consider that wisdom and how that plays into it. Okay, so I think we wrapped up our parable of the steward then. And a lot of people think that the rich man fired the steward. I happen to think that once the steward learned what was going on, that he kept him employed. In fact, why would he want to fire somebody who had just given all of his customers excellent customer service and concern and bonuses for a reward program for having done business with him? He wouldn't fire that. He wouldn't want to fire him and have his customers find that out. If he felt like your bottom line really was important, he's got to keep that guy employed. Isn't that interesting? So on either count, the steward had done wisely, but it was with the second time. It was with the approval of the rich man, who understood the value of good customers and customer service. So good customers and good marketing we've covered two important facets in those two parables. I'd like to try to go into another parable. How much time have we spent there, Mary?
10 minutes.
Okay. Well, real quickly, I have to tell you, we're doing some research on the wisdom of the 10 bridesmaids, and five were wise, 5 were foolish. It says, but the 5 who he says were wise, they weren't willing to share their oil with the 5 that were foolish, who did not bring extra oil in their vessels with their lamps. Now, it said in some translations it says, "Give us of your oil, because our lamps are going down." In other translations it says, "Give us of your oil, because our lamps are gone out." And I think it's interesting that there may very well be a word that's going and gone that works in the Greek for both. But for both possible words, going versus gone, going, gone. At any rate, that just changes a little bit how the parable goes, because if their lamps were completely gone out, then the wisdom of the wise virgins was go into town, buy oil for yourself. It's midnight, I would guess. They would have to be going out in the dark without any lamps or any light at all. Groping along maybe by moonlight or what have you. And it doesn't seem. And also, how old were these bridesmaids? Were they young girls, 13, 14, 15 years old? Do you want to send these, even though there's 5 of them, do you want to send them off into the dark and in the midnight as unescorted, or what? And so all these factors come into how wise was it to send those girls off to buy oil for themselves, and all because there might not be enough. There might not be enough for us and you also. If those, there was some. This is my book on parables, by the way, and this is really the book about parables that is widely held across all different faiths of what the parables mean, and it does look into this parable of the wise and foolish virgins. And I just want to point out something. The parables they're spoken so that hearing they would not hear, or seeing they would not see. But John, one place Jesus remarks on that. He says, "I thank thee, Father, that thou hast hid these things from the wise and prudent, and give them unto babes." Mm-hmm. The wise and prudent, it's hidden from. Now I take this commentary here, and I'm reading one of their experts. This gentleman would probably have education far beyond mine. Although I've been pretty diligently studying the words of Jesus. But be that as it may, this fellow that's commenting here in page 510, it says, they begged their companions, therefore, to give them some from their supply, some oil from their supply. But the latter being the ones that said, no, there may not be enough, the latter prudently replied, "Perhaps there will not be enough for us and for you. Go ye rather into them that sell and buy for yourselves." And this is at midnight. But I just thought it was kind of interesting that they used the word prudently. They prudently replied, because Jesus points out that God has He's spoken in parables and hid these things from the wise and prudent and delivered it unto babes. Isn't that kind of interesting? I think it's a total slap in the face. I don't know how in the world he missed that when he used that word prudent, because it was prudent. It was cautiously and carefully looking after your own business and to heck with everybody else is what it was sort of like. and putting those young girls at risk to be out on their own at dark. These 5 wise might have been 3 or 4 years older than the 5 foolish, for all we know. And so the gist of the whole parable, when you're talking about these 5 wise and 5 foolish verses, Jesus sums it up at the end of the story and says, watch, for you don't know the hour. Watch, for you don't know the hour. And I keep thinking, wherever 2 or more are gathered in his name, there he is in the midst of us. And if this parable really is a parable about the bridegroom, perhaps it's a parable about him being the bridegroom. And if they're all gathered, those 10 verses around, 10 bridesmaids are all out there together. They're all out there in his name and the name of his bride. And he is there in the midst of them. He is there among them. And I think that we miss that. We keep missing this part that where Jesus is among us. Wherever 2 or more are gathered. And if he is among us wherever 2 or more are gathered, then he's witnessing these 5 wise virgins who are so wise they send us others off into the dark to buy oil for themselves. He's witnessing that refusal to share the oil. He's witnessing that their light perhaps is not shining when it should. And would they have behaved any differently if he was in fact standing right there and they are determining what's best for these girls to do, and he's just observing this and saying, well, hey, if you can't share with these people, with these young people, then when they're gone, I'm going with them. I'll take them into another doorway. And why couldn't it just as easily been switched around and that the so-called wise virgins then are trying to enter in later, and he is instead taking the so-called foolish ones into the wedding feast, because at least they were putting forth an effort to take care of themselves due to the fact that the others had already released themselves of any responsibility to take care of their company for the evening. This was going to be their company for the evening, and they could care less about whether they shared their oil or not with them. It could be interpreted that way easily, and I think that's a pretty accurate description of them not letting their light shine. If you are children of light, you are going to be forgiving, but you're also going to be compassionate and caring. And so they all go together. So now I think about hit on 3 different parables. What I've tried to show is that these parables have 2 different possible approaches to them. One's very physical and the other is quite spiritual. One is non-loving, the other is loving. I mean, that's just really the bottom line. And that sometimes it's not the bottom line that's the most important thing when it comes to money versus what God wants us to do and say. So that's the second part then of the wrap up of the parables, and I want to go to one more at least. Let's call it there, Mary. Did I do okay?
Yeah, I did good.